Imagine a tiny coral island, just slowly sinking into the ocean.
Right, where the government is literally rewriting its entire constitution.
Exactly, rewriting it to allow foreign superpowers to, build artificial islands out of thin air.
And just to pay off a $1 billion debt, I mean, it's wild.
It is wild. Usually when people think of the Republic of Maldives, the image that immediately comes to mind is pure, unfiltered escapism.
Oh, absolutely. Overwater bungalows, crystal clear turquoise water.
Yeah, the white sand beaches. But if you take a step back and look at a map of global trade, that pristine, isolated paradise kind of vanishes.
It really does. It becomes the absolute definition of a strategic choke point, just disguised as a tourist haven.
Right, so we are taking a magnifying glass to the Republic of Maldives today for this deep dive. And let me tell you, it is not just a vacation spot. It's the geopolitical fulcrum of the entire Indian Ocean.
We are looking at a nation that sits precisely at the intersection of geoeconomics and maritime security. And for those of you listening who are tracking this for international relations analysis or maybe exam preparation, we're treating this deep dive as a high-retention, information-dense strategic briefing.
Yeah, exactly. We are converting these uploaded IR chapters directly into a revision tool for you. We won't just summarize things.
No, we're going to analyze the cause-effect chains, the strategic logic, the policy implications, and those really complex institutional relationships.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We're pulling together a really comprehensive strategic analysis. It covers the physical geography, the history, the rapidly rising Sino-Maldives dynamic.
Right, and that absolute diplomatic roller coaster between India and the Maldives.
Up through the massive geopolitical reset of late 2024 and 2025. You might be wondering why a nation of just over 500,000 people is the center of a tug of war between Asian superpowers.
Well, put yourself in the shoes of a regional policymaker. How do you secure your nation's energy supply when the only path for your oil tankers passes right through the territorial waters of a country that's actively courting your biggest strategic rival?
It's a nightmare scenario. By the end of this deep dive, you'll see how this tiny archipelago holds the literal keys to global maritime security. So let's start with the physical reality, geography.
Geography is destiny, In international relations, geography dictates the economy impacts domestic politics, and domestic politics rewrite regional security.
Geopolitics to economy to security to domestic impact. Got it. So let's lay down the core facts for your notes.
Right. Maldives is the smallest Asian country by land area. It has a population of 557,751.
But the critical strategic reality is how spread out it is. It's one of the world's most geographically dispersed sovereign states.
It comprises 26 different atolls, which are made up of 1,200 coral islands.
1,200. And they aren't just clustered in one spot. They stretch for 960 kilometers from north to south.
And you need to know the specific boundaries here. It goes from the Ihavantipallu Atoll in the north.
Wait, let me spell that out for anyone writing it down. Ihavandhippolhu. Ihavantipul.
Exactly. Down to the Adu Atoll in the south, ADDU, which actually crosses the equator.
And it sits exactly 750 kilometers southwest of the Indian coast.
Right, and what's fascinating here is the concept of a toll gate in the Indian Ocean region, or the IOR. When you look at that 960-kilometer stretch, in the context of naval movement, it essentially forms a physical wall.
An unavoidable barrier right in the middle of the western IOR.
Yes. To understand the mechanics, we have to talk about the SLOCs.
The sea lanes of communication, right?
Precisely. The SLOCs are the invisible highways of international shipping. They pass directly to the north and the south of this Maldivian wall.
Specifically, the routes heading to and from the Gulf of Aden and the Gulf of Hormuz.
Which means oil, energy security.
But let's explain the why here. Why can't a massive supertanker just, take a different route around it?
It comes down to the sheer economics of global shipping and the physical geography of the surrounding landmasses.
Right, because the Gulf of Hormuz is the main exit point for Middle Eastern oil.
Exactly. If you're shipping crude oil to fuel the massive manufacturing economies of China, Japan, or India, the most cost-effective route across the Indian Ocean physically forces you to navigate around the Maldives.
So uninterrupted energy supplies absolutely depend on these specific lanes.
And if a hostile power controls the Maldives, they possess the ability to provide effective surveillance, monitoring, and even potential interdiction of the entire Western IOR.
They dominate the shipping lanes.
Right. And this ties directly into multipolarity. Securing your own supply chains while having the leverage to threaten a rival's supply chains, that is the ultimate strategic prize in a multipolar world.
It's basically a high-stakes geopolitical chokehold. Let me use an analogy here. It's like having a strategically placed security camera in a really busy, narrow hallway.
That's a great way to look at it.
Right. Because if you control that camera, you control the situational awareness of the entire building. You see who is coming, who is going, what they're carrying.
And if you're India, you have this 960-kilometer-long security camera sitting just 750 kilometers from your own coastline.
So any unfriendly presence there is a direct threat to India's national security.
Which is the fundamental root cause of India's long-standing policy. Their goal is to position themselves as the net security provider in the region.
Because the geography hasn't changed, but the value of it has skyrocketed.
Exactly. Global trade's reliance on the Indian Ocean has peaked, especially with the whole Indo-Pacific construct becoming the center of global economic gravity.
Okay, wait. I need to push back on that term a bit. Net security provider.
Sure.
I mean, that sounds like incredibly polished diplomatic PR. Isn't that just a sanitized way of saying India acts like the regional hegemon?
That is the exact tension that drives the domestic politics of the Maldives. It's a brilliant point.
Because don't the Maldivians resent being treated like they are just a piece of territory in India's backyard?
Yes, absolutely. From India's perspective, being the net security provider means ensuring stability, fighting piracy, responding to natural disasters. It's framed as a public good.
Right, but from the other side.
From the perspective of a smaller sovereign state, overwhelming reliance on a massive neighbor feels like hegemony. It breeds resentment.
It feels like a total constraint on their strategic autonomy.
And as we will see, that psychological resentment is the exact vulnerability that external powers exploit.
Okay, listener, if you're taking notes for a strategic briefing or an exam, let's consolidate this first section on geography into an answer framework. Let's run a rapid revision recap.
Excellent. I'll read out the framework. Under background, you have smallest Asian country, 557,751 population, 1,200 islands, 26 atolls.
Got it. And for geography?
960-kilometer north-south spread, from Ihavandipalu to Adu Atoll, and it's 750 kilometers from India.
Okay, what about strategic motivation and root causes?
It acts as a physical barrier in the western IOR, astride critical SLOCs connecting the Gulf of Aden and Hormuz to East Asia.
So the security implications would be that it functions as a toll gate for global energy security.
Exactly. Ideal location for maritime domain awareness and surveillance.
And finally, India's imperative.
Proximity. 750 kilometers means any adversarial presence is a direct threat to India's coastal and maritime security, enforcing its role as a net security provider.
Perfect. Active recall question for you, the listener. What are the names of the northernmost and southernmost atolls that define this 960-kilometer wall? Take a second.
It's Ihavandipalu in the north and Adu in the south.
Hold on to those. They matter when we talk about military bases later. Moving on to Section 2, the historical foundation and crisis response, because India didn't just wake up in 2025 and realize the Maldives was important.
No, the historical ties are foundational. We're talking shared ethnic, linguistic, cultural, religious, and commercial links.
So when did they actually become independent?
The Maldives gained independence in 1965, though you'll sometimes see 1966 cited, depending on the British withdrawal agreement.
Right. And India was among the very first nations to recognize them.
Yes, they established their diplomatic mission in Malé in 1972.
And it's really driven by people-to-people contact. There's a massive Indian diaspora of about 25,000 nationals in the Maldives,
making them the second largest expatriate community there. Plus, Indians make up roughly 12% of the total tourist influx.
And it goes the other way, too. Maldivians rely heavily on India for higher education and specialized medical treatment.
But we need to look at the hard security history. For nearly 30 years, the Maldives was ruled by President Maumoon Abdul Gayoom.
And in 1988, this net security provider concept was violently put to the test.
The trigger event was a coup attempt. In November 1988, armed mercenaries actually infiltrated the capital, Malé.
Let's explain who these mercenaries were, because it links back to broader regional dynamics.
These were militants from a Sri Lankan Tamil secessionist organization called PLOT, the People's Liberation Organization of Tamil Eelam.
And they were hired by a Maldivian businessman to overthrow President Gayoom.
Wow. So what happened?
Gayoom's government was caught completely off guard. The president went into hiding and sent out frantic SOS messages to the international community, including the US and the UK.
But it was India that responded.
With overwhelming speed and force. It was known as Operation Cactus.
The logistics of Operation Cactus are wild to me. Within hours of the request, India deployed its 50th Independent Parachute Brigade.
They launched IL-76 transport aircraft from Agra, flew nonstop, and literally dropped paratroopers directly onto the Hul airport in the Maldives.
Talk about rapid response. They secured the airfield, entered the capital, rescued the president, and I read they even chased down a hijacked freighter fleeing into the ocean.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah.
And this operation firmly established what's known as the Indira Doctrine.
Which is what exactly? It's the unofficial strategic posture that India would simply not tolerate external interference or instability in its immediate South Asian neighborhood.
So it proved India actually had the expeditionary capability to back up its claim as the regional security provider.
Exactly. That's hard military power.
But there's another crisis response that is arguably more impactful because it deals with pure survival. Let's jump forward to December 2014.
Right, because the Maldives had embraced democracy in 2008, which shifted the political landscape. But geographically, they were just as vulnerable.
Enter Operation Near.
The background here requires understanding the topography. 1,200 coral islands. The Maldives has essentially zero standing fresh water.
No rivers, no massive lakes.
Nothing. Their entire survival depends on reverse osmosis, or RO, desalination plants. That's what converts seawater into potable drinking water.
On December 4th, 2014, the trigger event happens. A massive fire breaks out at the Mail Water and Sewerage Company.
It destroys the main generator, completely knocking out the city's desalination plant.
You have a densely populated capital city surrounded by an ocean with absolutely no drinking water.
Within 48 hours, an atoll in that situation becomes literally unlivable.
The Maldivian government declared a state of emergency and requested immediate international assistance.
And India's response was a masterclass in rapid logistical deployment and disaster relief.
Let's break down the mechanics of the airlift and the naval response, because the sheer scale is impressive.
The Indian Navy immediately diverted the INS Sukanya, which is an offshore patrol vessel.
It arrived carrying 35 tons of fresh water.
But crucially, it possessed onboard RO capabilities to produce an additional 20 tons of water per day.
But 20 tons a day does not sustain a capital city.
No, it doesn't. So by December 7th, just 3 days after the fire, the INS Deepak, a massive fleet tanker, arrived carrying 1,000 tons of water.
And that's just the maritime response. The Indian Air Force executed a massive airlift alongside it,
They flew 5 aircraft missions over 3 days.
utilizing 2 of their massive C-17 Globemaster III strategic transport aircraft.
And 3 IL-76 planes. They airlifted 380 tons of bottled water directly onto the islands.
So let's analyze the geopolitical implications of Operation Near.
Well, it was a humanitarian necessity, obviously, but strategically, it was a massive projection of soft power and logistical supremacy.
It physically demonstrated India's capacity as the ultimate first responder.
However, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it brings us right back to your earlier point about hegemony versus security.
Exactly. I want to look at the domestic impact on the Maldives. It's like having a neighbor who rushes over to put out a grease fire in your kitchen.
And then brings you groceries for a week while you fix your stove.
Right. At first, you are incredibly grateful. You owe them your life. But eventually, you start feeling suffocated. You start feeling incompetent.
Because as a sovereign nation relying on a foreign military just to have drinking water creates this deep psychological insecurity.
And that psychological insecurity is amplified by the institutional dimensions of democracy.
Because the 2008 democratic shift meant regular elections. Politicians need to campaign, they need to show strength, independence.
And crucially, they need to deliver tangible development to win votes. You can't just campaign on being grateful to India.
No, you campaign on building a new hospital, an airport, a massive bridge.
And infrastructure on a coral atoll requires massive amounts of capital that the Maldives simply did not have.
But in the early 2010s, there was a new global superpower heavily focused on geoeconomics.
And they were incredibly eager to provide that capital to secure their own supply chains.
Which leads us perfectly to the answer framework for Section 2.
Let's do it. 150-word answer framework on historical ties and crisis response.
Background. Deep ethnic, cultural, and commercial ties. 1965 independence. India establishes mission in 1972. 25,000 Indian diaspora, 12% of tourism.
Got it. And the trigger events or crisis responses.
2 main ones. First, 1988 Operation Cactus. Indian paratroopers thwart Piloti mercenary coup against President Muizzu. This establishes India's expeditionary capability and the Indira Doctrine.
And the second one is Operation Near.
Right. 2014 Operation Near, MWSC desalination plant fire causes critical water crisis. Indian Navy INS Sukanya, INS Deepak, and Air Force C-17s, IL-76s deliver massive water relief.
So the geopolitical implications would be cementing India's status as the net security provider and first responder.
Exactly. And the domestic impact. It creates a complex psychological dynamic in the Maldives. Gratitude mixed with a desire for strategic autonomy, which really drives the search for alternative partners post-2008 democratic transition.
Awesome. Rapid revision question for the listener. What was the name of the 2014 operation responding to the water crisis, and what specific naval assets were deployed? Pause and recall.
It was Operation Near, involving the INS Sukanya and INS Deepak.
Keep those facts locked in. Now we move to Section 3. The Dragon enters, the Yamin era and Chinese influence. This is where the geoeconomics truly dictate the geopolitics.
So, while China and the Maldives technically established diplomatic relations in 1972, the strategic root cause of the current friction began much later.
Right. The dossier explicitly marks the opening of the official Chinese embassy in Malé in November 2011 as the start of major political turmoil.
And then we get the trigger event, March 2013. Up until this point, an Indian infrastructure company, GMR Group, held a massive contract to operate and modernize the Male International Airport.
And suddenly, the Maldivian government just unilaterally cancels the contract.
The source material notes this was done without valid reasons, and they were abruptly replaced by a Chinese state-owned enterprise.
Let's explain the mechanism of this. In international relations, abruptly tearing up a binding bilateral infrastructure contract with your closest neighbor's flagship firm, that is a highly provocative act.
It signals a fundamental realignment of your foreign policy, and the domestic politics facilitated this.
Because President Mohammed Nasheed, who was the first democratically elected president and considered very pro-India, had stepped down under pressure in 2012.
Right. And 18 months later, in September 2013, controversial presidential elections bring Abdul Yamin to power.
And Yamin is aggressively, unapologetically China-leaning.
Yamin's presidency fundamentally rewrote the security architecture of the region. Exactly a year after his election, in September 2014, Chinese President Xi Jinping makes a historic visit.
The first ever visit by a Chinese head of state to the Maldives.
And Xi didn't just come to cut a ribbon. He came to integrate the Maldives into his grand strategy to re-rate global trade.
During this visit, the Maldives officially agreed to become an active part of the 21st Century Maritime Silk Road,
which is the oceanic component of China's Belt and Road Initiative, or the BRI.
Okay, we need to pause and explain the mechanisms of the BRI, especially how it targets supply chains in the context of the WTO weakening.
Absolutely. If global trade rules under the WTO are fragmenting, major powers use bilateral infrastructure loans to secure their own exclusive trade corridors.
Right. So by bringing the Maldives into the BRI, China secures a friendly port right on that toll gate we discussed earlier.
Exactly. It's about securing supply chains against potential future sanctions or blockades. And under Yamin, the floodgates of Chinese state capital just swung wide open.
But the agreements were incredibly opaque, weren't they?
Very. The financial terms were not made public, which raised massive alarms in New Delhi and Washington.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's look at the institutional and legal dimensions of this strategy.
Okay.
In May 2015, the Yamin government pushes a constitutional amendment bill through Parliament regarding land ownership.
Right, because historically, foreigners could only secure 99-year leases on Maldivian land. They could not own sovereign territory.
But this new amendment allowed foreigners to own land outright, but with two highly specific conditions.
First, the foreign entity had to invest a minimum of $1 billion in a government-approved project.
$1 billion. That immediately prices out almost everyone except state-backed actors.
Exactly.
But the second condition is the one that is legally and environmentally audacious. 70% of that land had to be physically reclaimed from the sea.
They literally wrote a constitutional amendment saying if you have $1 billion and you have the engineering technology to build an artificial island out of nothing but ocean and coral reef, you can keep it.
That is wild.
It is. And it was entirely tailor-made for China.
Let's connect this to the South China Sea strategy, because China has extensive experience and a highly controversial record of massive land reclamation.
Building artificial islands to assert territorial claims in the South China Sea. Exactly.
So this 2015 Maldivian law essentially gave Beijing a legal, constitutional pathway to build and own sovereign territory right in the middle of India's backyard.
And the environmental devastation of dredging that much coral reef is honestly secondary to the geopolitical shockwave.
The infrastructure projects just stacked up after that.
The modernization of the INIA airport was handed over. They built the massive China-Maldives Friendship Bridge connecting Malay to Hulu Island.
They leased Fedu Finoltu for a tourism project. They earmarked a 25-story housing project in Hulhumel.
This is the flawless execution of a geoeconomic playbook. But we have to look at the dual-use security implications.
Right. In 2017, they signed a protocol for a joint ocean observatory station.
Slated for the Makunudu Islands, Makunudho.
And look at the strategic location. Makunudu is situated perfectly astride those critical IOR shipping routes.
Now, the official line is always civilian, weather tracking, oceanographic research.
As security analysts understand that in modern warfare, maritime domain awareness is everything.
And observatory tracking ocean salinity and submarine acoustics is dual-use technology. Analysts immediately drew parallels to the early stages of militarization in the South China Sea.
Because an observatory today becomes a radar station tomorrow, and a resupply node the next day.
Exactly. And to lock this all in economically, in December 2017, Yamin signs a free trade agreement, an FTA, with Beijing,
allowing all Maldivian exportable goods tax-free entry into China.
But the real strategic hook was the debt. This is the core of the trade security linkage.
Yes, let's talk about the debt. By the end of Yamin's spending spree, the dossier reveals a staggering metric. Approximately 70% of the Maldives' entire foreign debt was owed to China.
70% to a single creditor.
And just servicing the interest on that debt was consuming over 20% of the Maldives' national budget.
Let's explain the mechanism of the debt trap here. When China's Exim Bank structures these loans, they often require sovereign guarantees.
Meaning, if the project, say, an airport, doesn't generate enough revenue to pay back the loan, the sovereign state is still on the hook.
Exactly. And when a nation cannot service its debt, the creditor gains massive political leverage. It fundamentally undermines the smaller country's strategic autonomy.
I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Go for it.
Isn't the debt trap diplomacy narrative just like anti-China propaganda pushed by the West and India? I mean, China's genuinely building infrastructure that these countries desperately need and that the West refused to fund. Are they really actively trying to bankrupt these nations, or are these just high-risk loans that sometimes go bad?
That is a crucial, critical thinking point. You are right that the Maldives desperately needed the infrastructure to ease congestion and boost tourism.
Right.
And yes, some economists argue that debt trap implies a deliberate, premeditated conspiracy to seize assets, which might be an oversimplification. But whether premeditated or merely the result of opaque, high-interest lending practices, the strategic outcome is exactly the same.
When 70% of your debt is held by one nation, your foreign policy is no longer independent.
Exactly. The analysts in the source material explicitly compare this to Sri Lanka, where the inability to service Chinese loans directly led to Colombo handing over the strategic Hambantota port to China on a 99-year lease.
The intent matters less than the structural vulnerability it creates.
Exactly. Okay, let's lock in Section 3 with an exam framework.
Sounds good. 250-word answer structure on the Yamin era and Chinese influence.
Background and trigger. Opening of Chinese embassy in 2011. Abrupt cancellation of Indian GMR airport contract in 2013. Election of pro-China President Abdul Yamin in 2013.
And the strategic motivations.
President Xi's 2014 visit officially integrates Maldives into the Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI, and the Maritime Silk Road, aiming to secure Chinese supply chains in the IOR.
Then we have the institutional and legal dimensions.
3 points here. First, the 2015 constitutional amendment allowed foreigners to own land if they invest $1 billion and reclaim 70% from the sea. Tailor-made for Chinese land reclamation techniques.
Parallels to the South China Sea.
Got it. Second, the 2017 Joint Ocean Observatory Station, planned at Makunudu Islands, sitting astride critical SLOCs, raises massive dual-use security concerns for India regarding maritime surveillance.
And the third was the 2017 Free Trade Agreement, deepening economic integration.
Right. Then we move to the economic and security implications, specifically the debt trap. Massive infrastructure push funded by Chinese state banks results in China holding 70% of Maldives' foreign debt, with debt servicing consuming 20% of the national budget.
So the impact on India is that it directly threatens India's traditional sphere of influence, introduces a hostile strategic footprint on India's maritime border, and undermines Maldivian strategic autonomy.
creating a severe security dilemma for New Delhi. Yes.
Perfect. Rapid recall for the listener. What percentage of the land had to be reclaimed from the sea under the 2015 law, and what was the debt percentage owed to China? Think about it.
It's 70% reclaimed land and 70% of total foreign debt.
Easy number to remember, 770. Now let's move to Section 4, the Balancing Act, India's strategic countermeasures.
Because India is watching all of this unfold 750 kilometers from its coast, they see the constitution change, the observatory planned, the debt ballooning.
They realize they can't just rely on the memory of Operation Cactus anymore.
Historical goodwill just evaporates in the face of billion-dollar infrastructure. If China was using geoeconomics, pouring concrete and issuing loans, India realized it had to counter with its own geoeconomic strategy.
They had to upgrade their strategic and security cooperation while offering alternative financial lifelines.
And this really aligns with India's broader push for Atmanirbhar Bharat, or self-reliant India, demonstrating that Indian engineering and capital can compete globally.
So India launches a massive counteroffensive of infrastructure. The centerpiece of this is the GMCP, the Greater Mail Connectivity Project, finalized in August 2020.
The strategic logic here was extremely clear. Create the most visible, impactful infrastructure project in the country, one that directly improves the daily economic reality of the Maldivian population and visibly outscales the Chinese projects.
It's like a high-stakes game of Go. China placed a stone on the board by building the Sino-Male Friendship Bridge. So India responds by placing a much larger, more expensive stone right next to it.
Attempting to surround and neutralize China's visual and economic influence.
Yeah, the source explicitly quotes that the objective was to render the Chinese-built bridge insignificant in comparison. Direct strategic competition executed in reinforced steel.
Let's explain the mechanics of the GMCP. It's a $500 million project. But crucially, look at how India structured the financing to directly contrast with China's debt trap model.
Right. India provided $400 million as a soft loan and $100 million as a direct grant.
Let's define the difference for clarity. A grant means no repayment is required. It's a gift.
And a soft loan means the terms are incredibly favorable. Very low interest rates, extended grace periods, long repayment schedules.
It is designed not to bankrupt the recipient, and the physical scale is massive. It's a 6.7-kilometer network of bridges and causeways,
Connecting the highly congested capital, Mali, to 3 adjacent islands, Vilingili, Filafushi, and Gulifahu.
By decentralizing the population and connecting industrial zones, you fundamentally upgrade the country's logistical capacity.
And then, when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, devastating their tourism-dependent economy, India stepped up again.
They initiated a 5-pronged assistance package covering air travel, sea transport, intra-island logistics, and telecommunications.
But infrastructure and economic aid are really just the carrot. India simultaneously moved to lock down the hard security relationship.
Because the threat environment was worsening. The People's Liberation Army Navy, the plan, had been steadily increasing its forays into the Indian Ocean over the last decade,
often utilizing anti-piracy operations in the Gulf of Aden as a pretext to maintain a persistent naval presence in the IOR.
So in February 2021, India's External Affairs Minister visits, and they sign a critical agreement to develop the Uthuru Thila Falu Harbor, the UTF Harbor.
This is a vital institutional link. The UTF Harbor development is specifically designed to strengthen the operational capability of the Maldivian Coast Guard.
The official rhetoric explicitly labeled both countries as partners in development and partners in security.
And India backed this up by extending a $50 million line of credit, specifically earmarked for defense purchases.
But India also knew that countering a superpower requires a coalition. Unilateral action looks like hegemony. Multilateral action looks like regional stability.
Which leads to the institutionalization of security in the region, the Colombo Security Conclave.
Yes. This is an India-driven minilateral institution. It originally included India, the Maldives, and Sri Lanka, and recently expanded to include Mauritius.
In March 2022, the national security advisors of these nations met in Male to consolidate their shared security objectives.
And they operationalized this. In November 2021, they executed a joint military exercise codenamed Focused Operation.
This was a 2-day operation in the exclusive economic zones, or EEZs, of the Southern Arabian Sea.
It involved the Indian Navy, the Maldivian National Defense Force, MNDF, and the Sri Lankan Navy.
Let's explain the mechanism of operating in an EEZ. An EZ extends 200 nautical miles from a country's coast, where they have exclusive rights to marine resources,
By conducting joint exercises in these zones, India is building interoperability.
meaning ensuring that Indian, Maldivian, and Sri Lankan communication systems, radar protocols, and tactical doctrines can seamlessly integrate.
If a crisis occurs, they fight as a unified force. It's a direct deterrent to unauthorized Chinese maritime incursions.
And there is one more geopolitical chess move that happens here. In February 2022, the Maldives signed an agreement allowing the United States to open its first ever permanent embassy in Malé.
Which is a profound geopolitical shift. Previously, the U.S. handled all Maldivian diplomatic affairs remotely via its ambassador in Sri Lanka.
Why does India, who guards its neighborhood so fiercely, want the U.S. setting up shop in the Maldives?
Because of the Indo-Pacific strategy and the QA, the strategic dialogue between India, U.S., Japan, and Australia.
Right. India realizes it cannot entirely bankroll the Maldives alone against the sheer mass of the Chinese economy.
By welcoming the U.S. diplomatic presence, the effort to counter China becomes internationalized.
The Maldives diversifies its diplomatic safety net, and India gains a powerful partner to ensure the Maldives doesn't slip back into an exclusive Beijing orbit.
Let's structure Section 4 into an exam framework.
A 150-word answer framework on India's strategic countermeasures.
Root causes. Need to counter China's massive infrastructure influence and planned naval presence in the IOR.
Economic response, the geoeconomics.
The Greater Mail Connectivity Project, or GMCP, in August 2020. A $500 million project, $400 a soft loan, $100 grant, a 6.7-kilometer bridge network linking Malé to Vilinoli, Thlifashi, and Gulifahu, designed to visibly outscale Chinese projects.
Okay, and the security and institutional response.
3 parts. 1. UTF harbor development in Feb 2021 to build Maldivian Coast Guard capability, backed by a $50 defense credit line. 2. Colombo Security Conclave in March 2022, an India-led mini-lateral institutionalizing regional security. 3. Joint exercises like Focused Operation in 2021 in the EEZ to build naval interoperability.
So the geopolitical implications would be the internationalization of the theater. The Maldives allows the first U.S. embassy in Feb 2022, aligning with broader Indo-Pacific and Q8 objectives to prevent exclusive Chinese hegemony.
Exactly.
Rapid recall for the listener. What is the name of India's $500 million bridge project? What are the 4 nations in the Colombo Security Conclave? Pause.
The project is the GMCP, Greater Mail Connectivity Project. The nations are India, Maldives, Sri Lanka, and Mauritius.
Awesome. Moving on to Section 5, the Muizzu shock and the economic reality check. So on paper, India's strategy looks brilliant. Bridges, soft loans, naval exercises.
But as we see time and time again, infrastructure projects take years to build, but a populist election campaign can change the national mood in months.
This is the ultimate collision between domestic political rhetoric and macroeconomic gravity. In September 2024, the Maldives holds a presidential election, and Mohamed Muizzu wins.
And he wins on a highly aggressive, highly specific platform, the India Out campaign. The source material states explicitly that he adopted a genuinely hostile policy towards New Delhi.
Let's analyze the root cause of this populist wave. It goes back to our earlier discussion on hegemony.
Right. It is incredibly easy for a politician in a small island nation to point at the massive Indian military footprint, the constant presence of Indian helicopters and naval personnel, and say, we have lost our sovereignty, they are treating us like a colony, I will kick them out.
But then you actually win the election, and you realize that political rhetoric does not pay for imports.
The timeline unravels with terrifying speed.
The trigger event wasn't even a grand policy shift. It was a disastrous diplomatic blunder on social media.
Shortly after Muizzu takes office, a junior minister in his cabinet makes highly derogatory comments about India and Prime Minister Modi on a social media platform.
And the response from the Indian public and state was instantaneous. We talked about trade security linkages. This is the weaponization of tourism.
Indian tourists, who constitute roughly 12% of the market, effectively boycotted the Maldives. There was a steep, catastrophic drop in Indian arrivals.
For an economy that derives the vast majority of its GDP from tourism, that is a fatal blow to their foreign exchange reserves.
Let's explain the mechanics of a Forex crisis. A nation like the Maldives doesn't produce its own oil, medicine, or bulk food. It has to import them.
Right, and international suppliers do not accept Maldivian rupiah. They demand U.S. dollars.
So if the tourists start bringing dollars in, the central bank runs dry.
The dossier notes that at the height of this crisis, the Maldives was left with barely enough foreign exchange to cover 45 days of essential imports.
45 days. If you reach zero, letters of credit bounce. Ships carrying fuel refuse to dock. The power grid shuts down, hospitals run out of medicine, and the country grinds to a halt.
It is a terrifying scenario for any head of state.
And looming over this immediate cash flow crisis is the legacy of the Yamin era. That debt hadn't vanished,
The total external debt had soared to $3.37 billion.
which is nearly 45% of their entire GDP. And crucially, almost half of that external debt was owed directly to China.
So tourism revenues are crashing, the foreign exchange vault is nearly empty, and massive sovereign loan payments are coming due.
The country was pushed to the absolute brink of sovereign default. Consequently, international credit rating agencies like Moody's officially downgraded their credit rating.
Let's explain the impact of a credit downgrade. It means the global financial system views you as a massive risk.
If Muizzu tries to borrow new money on the international bond market to pay off the old debt, the interest rates will be punitively, impossibly high. They are locked out of global capital.
And India, practicing hard geoeconomics, didn't just sit back, they applied active pressure.
The dossier notes that India regulated the export of essential commodities to the Maldives, restricting them to just 4 designated Indian ports.
This is a classic administrative trade lever. By restricting the ports of origin, you artificially disrupt the supply chain.
You force ships to reroute, which significantly raises the logistical cost of imports for the Maldives, amplifying their inflation and forex burn rate.
It's a harsh reminder of Atmeterbar trade leverage.
Furthermore, the people-to-people contact strained. Maldivians who relied on India for health services and education were caught in the crossfire.
This raises the fundamental strategic dilemma for any small island developing state. How much strategic autonomy can you actually afford to project when your debt-to-GDP ratio is that precarious and your neighbor controls your supply chains?
Put yourself in President Muizzu's shoes. You just won an election by painting India as the enemy. You promised to kick them out.
But you wake up, look at the Treasury reports, and realize your country will go bankrupt in 45 days.
How do you walk back your entire political identity without facing a massive domestic revolt?
You are forced into ruthless pragmatism. You realize that you cannot feed your citizens with sovereignty rhetoric.
This sets the stage for the dramatic pivot. Let's lock in Section 5.
150-word answer framework on the Muizzu shock and forex crisis.
Trigger event. Election of President Muizzu in Sept 2024 on a populist, hostile India out campaign, exacerbated by derogatory social media comments by a junior minister.
Economic implications and root causes.
4 main points. 1. Tourism boycott. Steep drop in Indian tourists causing a catastrophic revenue shortfall. 2. Forex crisis. Foreign exchange reserves plummet to cover only 45 days of imports.
3. Debt burden. External debt reaches $3.37 billion, or 45% of GDP, largely driven by legacy Chinese loans. 4. Credit downgrade. Moody's downgrades Maldivian sovereign credit, locking them out of cheap global capital.
Perfect. Then India's balancing strategy leverages geoeconomics by restricting essential commodity exports to 4 designated ports, raising Maldivian import costs.
And finally, the strategic dilemma. Moody's populist political rhetoric collides violently with macroeconomic realities, forcing an immediate reevaluation of the bilateral relationship to avoid state bankruptcy.
That's the framework.
Active recall time. What was the critical number of days of import cover the Maldives had left at the peak of the crisis? And what was their external debt percentage relative to GDP?
45 days of imports, 45% of GDP. 45 and 45, remember that.
Moving into Section 6, the Great Reset, 2024 to 2025.
The walk back happened comprehensively and swiftly. Less than a month after the crisis peaked, from October 4th to the 8th, 2024, President Muizzu travels to India.
And he brings a massive delegation. The stated objective is pure administrative survival, seek financial stability, and normalize relations.
And he had to eat crow publicly. During this visit, he explicitly acknowledges that the Maldives will not compromise India's security. He formally repudiates the core threat of his own India Out campaign.
The resulting suite of agreements signed in October 2024 is staggering. It is a textbook case of leveraging a crisis to establish institutional capture.
They adopted a massive overarching framework titled A Vision for Comprehensive Economic and Maritime Security Partnership.
You should look at that title, Economic and Maritime Security. They are explicitly legally linking the survival of the Maldivian economy to the security requirements of the Indian state.
Let's walk through the mechanisms of what was actually signed. First, the immediate financial rescue, the currency swap agreement.
The terms were for 30 billion Indian rupees and 400 million US dollars.
Explain how a currency swap works in this context, because this is the exact mechanism that stopped the bankruptcy.
Right. A currency swap is essentially a massive, immediate bilateral credit line between central banks. The Maldives Monetary Authority, the MMA, hands over their local currency, the rupiah, to the Reserve Bank of India, the RBI.
In exchange, the RBI injects 30 billion rupees and $400 million directly into the Maldivian reserves.
It instantly recapitalizes their foreign exchange, allowing them to clear those letters of credit, buy fuel, buy food, and stave off a sovereign default. It bridges the 45-day gap.
Absolute financial lifeline. But India extracted massive institutional concessions in return.
They agreed to refit the Maldivian Coast Guard ship, the Hurrivi, gratis, completely free of charge, physically embedding Indian naval engineering back into their defense forces.
They officially launched the RuPay card in the Maldives, which tightly integrates their financial and digital payment systems with India's, aligning with India's digital public infrastructure diplomacy.
They inaugurated the new runway at Hanamadu International Airport, built by India. They handed over 700 social housing units built using credit from India's Exim Bank.
Exim Export-Import Bank. This is how India exports its domestic engineering capacity abroad, tying foreign development to Indian domestic growth.
But the most critical part of this reset is the Memorandums of Understanding, or MOUs.
Yes, the MOUs, this is where India embeds itself into the permanent bureaucracy of the state. They sign an MOU between the Rashtriya Raksha University of India and the National College of Policing and Law Enforcement of the Maldives.
Let's explain the mechanism of institutional capture here. If Indian institutions train the Maldivian police force, the Maldivian police adopt Indian standard operating procedures, Indian radio protocols, and Indian command structures.
It creates bureaucratic inertia.
Exactly. They sign another MOU between India's Central Bureau of Investigation, the CBI, and the Anti-Corruption Commission of the Maldives.
Meaning Maldivian investigators use Indian intelligence sharing and evidentiary standards. If they investigate a corrupt, opaque Chinese infrastructure contract, they're doing it with CBI methodologies.
They renew an MOU between the National Judicial Academy of India and the Judicial Service Commission of the Maldives. India is training their judges.
And they even signed an MOU on sports and youth affairs.
This is a full-spectrum institutional embrace. Politicians like Muizzu or Yamin come and go with election cycles, but the police force, the judiciary, the Coast Guard, that is the permanent state apparatus.
By integrating the training and operations of these institutions with India, New Delhi makes it incredibly difficult structurally and legally for any future politician to simply flip a switch and pivot the country back toward Beijing.
And as a final counter to China, both countries agreed to initiate negotiations for a free trade agreement, an FTA, directly challenging the FTA Yamin signed with China in 2017.
Muizzu went from India out to signing agreements for everything down to youth sports. It is a masterclass in real politics.
And this reset was so total that by July 2025, Prime Minister Narendra Modi makes a historic visit to the Maldives.
As the guest of honor for the Maldives' 60th Independence Day celebrations, you cannot script a better symbol of rehabilitated relations. Standing there, cementing the vision document signed the previous October.
Did Muizzu completely abandon China, though?
No, the dossier notes he maintained a nuanced stance, emphasizing a desire for balanced relationships. He has to. He still owes Beijing over $1 billion.
But India definitively proved that when the economic abyss opens up, New Delhi is the only indispensable first responder.
Let's lock in the final exam framework for Section 6.
250-word answer structure on the Great Reset 2024-2025.
Trigger event. Looming sovereign default forces President Muizzu to abandon the India out policy and visit India in October 2024.
And the strategic agreements.
Adoption of a vision for comprehensive economic and maritime security partnership, legally intertwining Maldivian economic survival with Indian security needs.
In the economic rescue mechanisms.
First, currency swap agreement. INR 30 billion and USD 400 million injected by RBI to avert forex default. Second, infrastructure and integration. Handover of 700 Exim bank housing units, Hanamadu Airport runway inauguration, and launch of RuPay digital payments. Initiation of bilateral FTA talks.
And the institutional dimension, that bureaucratic capture.
Massive suite of MOUs designed to embed Indian influence into the permanent Maldivian state apparatus. RRU trains Maldivian police, CBI partners with Anti-Corruption Commission, National Judicial Academy trains Maldivian judges, refit of Coast Guard ship Huravi.
And the future implications.
Culminating in PM Modi's July 2025 visit as guest of honor for Independence Day, the reset demonstrates that geoeconomic realities ultimately override populist geopolitical rhetoric. India secures its maritime southern flank through deep institutional integration.
Final rapid recall for this section. What was the exact financial breakdown of the currency swap agreement? Recall it.
30 billion Indian rupees and 400 million US dollars.
So listener, let's step back and view this entire board. We started with a 960-kilometer wall of coral, acting as a toll gate for global energy supplies in the Indo-Pacific.
We saw the foundational history of India rushing in with water during Operation Near and paratroopers during Operation Cactus.
We analyzed the aggressive entry of Chinese state capital, utilizing opaque agreements, a constitutional amendment requiring 70% land reclamation, and massive infrastructure projects to ensnare the country in a debt trap amounting to 45% of its GDP.
We broke down India's geoeconomic counteroffensive, the $500 million GMCP bridge soft loans, and the institutionalization of regional security through the Colombo Security Conclave and U.S. Embassy presence.
And we witnessed the Muizzu shock, the harsh collision of an anti-India populist campaign with the unforgiving realities of a 45-day Forex reserve, leading to the dramatic Great Reset of 2024 and deep institutional capture via MUES.
It is the ultimate case study in trade security linkages.
But before we sign off, I know you always leave us with a broader, overarching perspective, something outside the immediate diplomatic cables.
We spent this entire strategic briefing analyzing how the Maldives pivots based on immediate financial survival. Debt traps, currency swaps, infrastructure races.
Right.
But there is a massive existential variable shadowing this entire board. The Republic of Maldives is comprised of 1,200 coral islands, sitting at an average elevation of just 4 feet above sea level.
Yeah, 40 feet.
As climate change accelerates and sea levels inevitably rise, the physical existence of this sovereign state is threatened. In the coming decades, the ultimate superpower currency in the Indian Ocean might not be who offers the cheapest soft loans or who trains the judiciary.
Wow. Okay.
The ultimate geopolitical leverage will belong to the nation that possesses the engineering and technological capability to literally keep the Maldives above water. Massive seawalls, advanced dredging, floating infrastructure. The question for future strategists is, when the water truly starts rising into the streets of Malé, who provides that security?
That is a chilling but absolutely essential strategic reality to mull over. Thank you for joining us on this highly intensive deep dive. If you've tracked all our frameworks and recaps, you are now armed with the history, the economic mechanisms, and the strategic foresight to dominate any analysis of the Indian Ocean region. The next time you see a postcard of those overwater bungalows, you'll know exactly what's holding them up. Keep analyzing and keep diving deep.